A story of silence. But listen closely. Connecting minds. Connecting from Africa for the world.
You ever wonder why no one flinches when a European company buys 10,000 hectares in Africa, but the moment an African country says we're not selling anymore, everyone loses their damn minds? Funny how that works. For years, Burkina Faso was open for business. That's how they said it. In brochures, investment forums, embassy dinners. Open like a wound. Open like a deal you couldn't refuse because you were never in a position to negotiate. You had foreign firms buying land they'd never stepped foot on. Bankers in Geneva flipping soil like stock options. Ambassadors calling land reform a security risk. Security for who? And through it all, the world clapped. Because when we sell, they call it integration. When we take it back, they call it instability. So yeah, when Traoré signed that law banning foreign land ownership, they panicked. Not because it was violent, because it was clean, because it was legal, because it was ours. And for the first time, their money couldn't override our decisions. That's the part they couldn't stomach. Let's be clear, this wasn't isolationism. This was insulation from exploitation. And if that makes them nervous, good. Let's not kid ourselves. They didn't just buy acres, they bought the story. They bought the right to say things like unused land. Like a plot that's fed 5 generations suddenly becomes vacant because it doesn't have a title deed written in French. They bought words like development zone, which usually meant a foreign firm wanted the river and your grandma's cassava patch was in the way. They bought silence from local officials who signed deals in air-conditioned rooms while villagers held meetings under mango trees they were about to lose. They bought speed. Laws pushed through Parliament in one night, no translation, no explanation, just signatures and flashbulbs. And then they sold it back to us as progress. You ever notice how every press release says the same thing? Empowering local communities. Unlocking agricultural potential. Public-private synergy. Synergy? Let's talk about that synergy. A Saudi-backed firm cleared 7,000 hectares of grazing land in the east. Promised jobs, clinics, roads. What they built was a chain-link fence and a heliport. The clinic? Never opened. The jobs? Security guards, watching their own land from behind the gate. But the paper looked beautiful. The numbers looked good. The speech in Davos? Flawless. And if you protested, you were anti-business. If you asked questions, you didn't understand macroeconomic realities. Reality is this. Our land fed us. They turned it into leverage. Our silence protected our ancestors. They called it ignorance. Our patience? They confused it for permission. So when the government said enough, when it ripped up those contracts and made new ones, in our names, on our terms, the system didn't just tremble, it screamed. Because for once they couldn't buy the narrative, and that scared them more than losing the land. You know what's wild? For decades, outsiders bought land here by the truckload, and no one called that radical. They'd clear forests, redirect rivers, rename villages on maps drawn in boardrooms 5,000 miles away. Not a peep. Not a protest. Just handshakes and ribbon cuttings. But the moment we said no, no more foreign ownership, no more 99-year ghost deals, no more hiding our future in someone else's vault, that's when they pulled out the word radical. They said we were reckless, dangerous, that we'd scare off investment, tank our economy, destabilize the region. Let me ask, who exactly was stable before this? The woman farming land she didn't legally own? The village fenced out of its own water source? The kids walking past gold mines to attend broken schools? That wasn't stability. That was sedation. We were drugged on dependency, told to stay calm, wait our turn, accept the trade-offs. Be realistic, they said. Let the experts handle it. Except the experts weren't dying when wells dried up. The experts weren't burying children in soil sold off without consent. So yeah, maybe ripping up those contracts was radical, but not in the way they think. Radical isn't rage. Radical is clarity. It's saying, we don't owe you access just because you showed up with money. We don't have to sell the land to prove we're open to the world. We can protect what's ours without permission slips from Paris or Washington. And here's what really scared them. We didn't do it with tanks. We did it with documents, with councils, with code, with consent. We rewrote the rules using tools they thought we'd never understand. Legal language, digital systems, constitutional power. We beat them at their own game, and suddenly the board got flipped, so they called it radical. But on the ground, it felt like something else entirely. It felt like breathing. For the first time in a generation, people weren't walking with their heads down. They were walking with paper, with proof, with presence. And maybe, just maybe, that's what real freedom looks like. Not a flag, not a slogan, just standing on soil that finally says, yes, you belong here. They used to say we had no paperwork. That was always the excuse, right? Sorry, there's no record you live here. No formal deed, no legal claim. Customary land doesn't count. As if history only began when they showed up with clipboards. But now we've got receipts. Plastic-coated lease certificates, tougher than the storm season. Biometric tags tied to family plots. Village councils logging names by hand, then syncing them to digital registries built by kids who learned to code on cracked smartphones. No more missing files. No more, oops, someone else bought it. Now, when someone shows up claiming your field, you show them your document, your stamp, your GPS coordinates, and you say, this land remembers me, do you? And it hits different. Because it's not just about land, it's about existence. When your name is on the soil, you don't walk like a guest. You don't whisper during meetings. You don't accept bribes because you're scared of being erased. You speak, you stand, you plan. One elder in Yatenga put it best. He held up his lease paper like a shield and said, I used to survive by memory. Now I survive by proof. And that proof? It's changing everything. Co-ops are forming, legal ones. Banks are opening credit lines because suddenly people have collateral, not just hope. Leverage. Farmers are planting long-term crops, mango, shea, even teak, because now they know no one's kicking them off after harvest. And here's the twist. It's making the land more productive, more stable, more valued. So next time they ask if this reform is working, point to the fields with new fences and replanted roots. Point to the women with ledgers. Point to the teenagers updating boundary maps with tablets instead of machetes. Then ask them, when was the last time a piece of paper made a human being feel like they existed? Because here, it's happening every damn day. You want to know what pushback really looks like? It's not always headlines. Not always protests or men in suits shouting on TV. Sometimes it's a quiet phone call. Sometimes it's a grant that disappears without explanation. Sometimes it's a printer in a village registry office that just stops working and no one shows up to fix it. That's how it started. Right after the law passed, foreign embassies didn't scream. They just got very polite. Meetings were postponed. Partnerships reassessed. Reports started using strange phrases like governance irregularities and investor risk environments. Let me translate that for you. You're no longer letting us control the playground, so now we're taking our ball and going home. 3 foreign mining firms suspended operations. 2 development banks froze funding. And a handful of former land ministry insiders started whispering, this won't last. The people don't understand what they're doing. Understand? You mean the farmers who've been working this land longer than your country's been independent? The women who've been organizing co-ops before you ever knew what co-op meant? The kids building digital registries on secondhand laptops? Nah, they understand just fine. What they don't understand is why justice is considered dangerous. And here's the thing that really rattled the old system. People didn't riot. They organized. In Kudugu, a group of school teachers formed a watchdog group, monitoring every new land transaction filed with the registry. In Zorgo, youth collectives began auditing who really owned what, block by block. They printed maps, they filmed testimonials, they knocked doors. And when the pushback came, they didn't beg. They posted. They showed the world. We are not confused, we are correcting. So now the pressure's shifting. The system that was built to keep people guessing is being questioned. The gatekeepers are looking over their shoulders. And the people? They're not asking for favors, they're asking for records, for proof, for respect. So if you're watching this thinking, what's the real cost of land justice? Here's your answer. The cost is discomfort, but not for us. The discomfort belongs to those who got too comfortable stealing in silence. And if that bothers you, good. Say something. Comment. Share. Question the systems in your own backyard. Because if this makes the right people nervous, we're probably on the right path. Here's something no one expected. Once people owned land, they started acting like they owned the whole damn system, and maybe they should have. Because once the paper was in their hands, something clicked. It wasn't just, this is my plot. It was, this is my process. This is my say. This is my right to decide what happens next. In villages that used to beg the district office for attention, people started holding their own hearings. Land disputes weren't shipped off to some distant court. They were resolved right there in public, in front of the community, not by lawyers in ties, by women with memory, by elders who knew every inch of that hill, by young people tracking parcel boundaries with their phones. And it worked. In Seba, two rival families had fought for control of the same rice field since the 90s. Every court case stalled, every bribe deepened the feud. Then one day, the new village council called both sides in. No shouting, no threats, just bring your story, bring your papers, let's end this now. They drew new lines, split water access, agreed on planting zones, and for the first time in 30 years, they shook hands over that field. That's governance. Not the kind that waits for permission, the kind that acts like the state when the state forgets to show up. Meanwhile, in the cities, youth councils weren't just protesting. They were proposing new zoning guidelines, fair land taxation models, public dashboards tracking who owns what. They started asking, why are we only owning land? Why not the process that protects it? And honestly, no one had an answer, so they just kept going. Even bureaucrats began to adapt. You walk into a land office now, you might find a 26-year-old civil servant asking questions that used to get people fired. Where did this lease come from? Was the community consulted? Is this development or displacement? That's the shift. The people aren't just showing up, they're watching, they're auditing, they're building systems in real time, on dusty laptops, under tin roofs, with no donors in sight. You think that's small? It's not. It's a blueprint. One plot, one council, one protocol at a time. And if you're still waiting for someone in charge to fix things, let me say it plain, no one is coming. But we're already here. Let's get something straight. This isn't a moment. This isn't a campaign. This isn't something you put in a glossy report and forget by next quarter. This is a threat, not to people, not to peace, to the old way of doing things. The way where power flowed up and never came back down. The way where communities were consulted after the land was already gone. The way where development meant get out of the way while we profit. And now, that playbook doesn't work here anymore, because Burkina Faso tore it up, page by page, contract by contract. And the ripples? They're not ripples anymore, they're shockwaves. You've got NGOs in East Africa whispering, what if we adopted a Zaka-style protocol? Urban planners in Ghana studying local council models birthed in dusty Sahel villages. Grassroots land auditors popping up in places that don't even have paved roads, but have Wi-Fi and willpower. And the old players? They're nervous, and not hiding it well. Multilateral agencies are suddenly obsessed with evaluating the long-term viability of localized land governance models. Translation, how the hell are they pulling this off without us? Private investors are lobbying to reintroduce market flexibility mechanisms. Translation, we want the backdoor open again. And academics? Oh, now they're interested. Now they want to study the community resilience outcomes of decentralized ownership frameworks. Where were they when families were getting evicted for not having a printed map? Now they show up when there's structure, when there's clarity, when the thing they ignored becomes the thing they can't afford not to notice. But you know who's not impressed? The woman in Kenedougou who negotiated a co-op land agreement that protects water access for 3 villages. The teenagers in Ouahigouya who built a land dispute app with an open source database. The imam in Po who printed every family's lease certificate and keeps them in a metal cabinet in the mosque, just in case. Because to them, this isn't disruption, it's repair. And to those who say, but isn't this just a phase? Here's the response. If you think land justice is a trend, you've clearly never had it stolen from you. So no, this isn't temporary, it's tectonic. And the old way? It's running out of time. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just stays. That's what changed after the reform. Not just laws, not just fences, not just maps. Presence. For the first time in a long, long time, people didn't feel like guests on their own land. They walked slower, straighter, not out of pride, but out of something deeper, certainty. Because when you hold a lease with your name on it, written in your language, approved by your people, stored in a system you helped build, you don't flinch when someone knocks on your door. You don't wait for permission. You don't ask, is this still mine? You know. India Paga, a widowed mother of 4, rebuilt her small farm after years of renting it from a man who lived in Belgium. Now, she owns it. She replanted her father's mango trees, roots that go back further than any contract. And when I asked her what changed most, she didn't say money. She said, I sleep now, I plant now, I know I'm not borrowing my life. That's what the critics don't get. This isn't just about productivity, it's about identity. Because when people belong somewhere, they build, they defend, they teach their children to protect, not flee. And what happens next? Communities stop asking for aid. They start making demands. They stop surviving policy. They start shaping it. They stop being statistics. They start being stakeholders. That's real power. And it doesn't come from tanks or tweets. It comes from a grandmother holding a land deed like it's scripture. From a 17-year-old mapping parcels on a busted tablet like he's guarding treasure. From a market vendor saying, no, you can't build here. This stall's been mine since 1996, and now I have proof. And the best part, that kind of power doesn't need to go viral. It doesn't need permission. It doesn't even need attention. It just needs one thing, to not be taken away. Let's cut the fluff. They're calling us dangerous now? Good, they should. Because for once, they're not wrong. Burkina Faso just did what they never expected. We stopped handing over the keys. We stopped letting outsiders decide who eats and who gets kicked off the land. We stopped playing nice. That's the danger they're talking about. Not riots, not coups. Control. Control at the village level. Control in the hands of women who used to need a man's signature just to keep farming their own plot. Control by kids with phones who now understand boundaries better than the land brokers ever did. And the reaction? Quiet panic. Foreign investors freezing deals. Donors reevaluating partnerships. Think tanks dropping phrases like geopolitical uncertainty tied to land tenure disruptions. Yeah, we see you. But ask yourself, where was that urgency when people were getting pushed off their land for sugarcane plantations they never got a job from? Where were those policy memos when kids were drinking dirty water because the borehole project never showed up? Let's be honest, they weren't watching because they didn't care until now, until the poor got organized, until the paperwork started fighting back, until community council stopped meaning rubber stamp and started meaning gatekeeper. So yeah, we're dangerous. We're dangerous because we figured out the system. We're dangerous because we stopped waiting for permission. We're dangerous because we're not asking to be saved. We're asking for space. And when people who've held the pen for too long see you writing your own terms, they panic, they reframe, they throw labels. Populist, nationalist, destabilizing. Fine, call it what you want. But let's be clear, if this is what danger looks like, we'll take it. Let's wrap this clean. What happened in Burkina Faso is simple. People took back what was already theirs. And this time, they didn't ask. They documented, they defended, and they dared to shut the door on anyone who thought they still had a say. No fancy slogans, no saviors, no deals behind closed doors. Just this. Land in our names. Rules we understand. Power where it belongs. On the ground. So don't just scroll past. If you're watching this, ask yourself, who owns the land around you? Do they live there? Do they care what happens on it? And if the answer makes you uncomfortable, then speak. Drop a comment, share the video. Tell us what's broken where you are. And if it's working, tell us that too. Because this isn't just about Burkina Faso. It's about every place where people were told to sit still and stay quiet. Not anymore.